Yeah, thank you. I think that's just about the most popular song I play anywhere. Everybody wants to sing along with that. Excuse me a second. If you sing along, that's great. There's another song that was popular about the same time. It was recorded by Bing Crosby and then especially Patti Page, and that was the Tennessee Waltz. And that was a big hit in 1950. Patti Page sold, would you believe, like 10 million copies of that. It was like the best-selling single they'd ever had at that time. Before that, though, somebody recorded the same song, and they bombed. The name of that group was Pee Wee King and his Golden West Cowboys. Did you know that they sang, that they recorded the Tennessee Waltz? You didn't know that, did you? No, they didn't get famous for it, but Patti Page got rich and famous for it. So give her due.
Henry?
Yes.
That's what I was going to say. Move the stand over
It's because you can't see me playing? Want me to move it over here? Okay. So I'm not looking at my hands, but I guess maybe you are. I was at New Haven Court a couple of weeks ago, and somebody had an anniversary. They asked me to play that song, and I had never learned it. I'd heard it, but I'd never learned it. So you're the first audience to ever hear me play that song. And I've come to love it already. You know, most of the songs I love were mostly written before I was born, and a lot of them were written before you were born, and that's going to be true of some songs I'm going to play later. I do get asked a lot, you know, what's the easiest question, or the question I'm most likely to hear is, how long have you been playing the piano? Well, I am 74, and my mother made me start when I was 11, so I guess I was in 5th grade. I grew up in rural Upper Michigan in a very tiny community. My dad was the pastor of a church of about 35 people, with about 25 in the choir, of which my mother was the choir director. And I became the church pianist and the choir director pianist in, I think, 7th grade, something like that. Before that, I sang alto in the choir, though I learned to sing alto from Mrs. Susie Ott, who sat one row behind me in church. So, yeah, I learned that way. My mother, we lived rurally, so the nearest town was not that far, but to find a piano player, they found me this little Italian man named Uncle Louie, and I'm 11 years old, and Uncle Louie is bald and has a glass eye and a poodle that barks during our lessons. But he really loved music, but interesting thing is he did not actually play the piano. He was a barroom accordionist, but he knew a lot of good songs. And besides making sure that I learned my Bach and Beethoven, and he'd never actually played them for me, so he would just tell me when it was good enough to move on to the next song in the book. But he gave me lots of other enriching materials from other areas of music, like, I don't know, ragtime and stuff like that. But I was going to tell you, I was in my first year of lessons, and he told me, and I'm kind of a Mennonite Baptist. That's kind of the church it is. It's kind of narrow, And he said, I think, son, you're going to be a jazz pianist when you grow up. Like a jazz pianist? I didn't know really what jazz was, but I was pretty sure that I should avoid it. I was told to avoid all appearances of evil. And I mean, that's what cards and gambling and smoking and women, wild women. I don't know. I knew that I probably should stay away from jazz. But what he was picking up was that no matter what he gave me, I'd mess around with it and play it different than it was on the page. And I was doing that with the hymns in the church too. And the style of the music in our little Mennonite Baptist church, I'll just play a little bit of I think it was like the frog in the water that's getting hotter, they don't really notice. Like, What a Friend We Have in Jesus is, I'll play it out of the book just a little bit, and then how I ended up playing it. Right? So then. Guest ministers and missionaries and stuff, and they'd stay in our little house, and they heard me practicing and stuff. So one of the ministers told me that my playing was worldly, and I'm only about 14 years old at the time, right? He said, you shouldn't play 6 chords. You know what I was doing with 6 chords? I was learning to play Petticoat Junction. So it's a bunch of 6 chords. I guess I didn't sound right to him for church. But one style, there's an awful lot of styles of jazz, and I've played a few of them already that were definitely jazz influenced, harmonies and rhythms. I'm going to go in the direction of kind of boogie woogie for this song, Rock Around the Clock, Bill Haley and the Comets, and I'll move into Kansas City. But I wanted to tell you about where did I write that? Rock Around the Clock. Okay. Bill Haley and the Comets made it famous in 1954. It was the B-side. And you know what the B-side is? Remember 45s? They had the one, so the artist or the record label would say, we're going to play the A-side on the radio, and then people will buy it, and maybe people will flip it over, and maybe they'll like the B-side too. So anyways, 12 o'clock, or Rock Around the Clock was the B-side. Guess what the A-side was? It was 13 women, and I'm the only man in town. That song did not become famous. I listened to it. I can see why. shifting gears here, I'd like to play a Cheek to Cheek from the movie. I think is it called Top Hat? Ginger Rogers and Fred Astaire, you know, they dance in the ballroom and Fred Astaire sings to her. It's a beautiful song, Cheek to Cheek. And the one after that, I'd like to play It Had to Be You. And I think that's one of the favorite songs that I hear from people. This is my favorite song. And I like It Had to Be, I love the song It Had to Be. I've played it for 40 years, I'm sure. But anyways, it was written by a guy close to Columbus, Ohio, called Isham Jones. And his wife gave him a grand piano for his 30th birthday. And his 30th birthday happened in 1924. So 101 years ago, he had a 30th birthday. His wife gave him the piano. He stayed up all night and he wrote the song It Had to Be You. And a friend of his added the nice lyrics later, but I think his wife still gave him credit for writing a really pretty song. And then I'd like to move into Unforgettable. And then I'm going to look at the clock and see if there's time for anything else. We are going to give you an opportunity to sing and switch gears. I have a collection of hymns that I brought that I'm going to pass out some books. Excuse me. Would someone help pass out the booklets? Been around a little short, so I'm going to do that. Well, Lisa, would you give me one too? Guess I need one too.
Do you want me to sit here?
I don't think you need to. I think the room will fill. I think the people in the room will fill enough.
Okay.
Sorry. That's true. Pleasure. If I miss something. You want? Okay. Okay.
Are you the only one?
I just thought if I sang occasionally, it would pick me up some. I don't want to be on the microphone a lot. If we both. About we start with Amazing Grace number 2, and then hopefully you guys pick the next one after that, okay? We don't have time to do all of these, obviously, but I mean, feel free to, we can rove from hither to and hither, what do you call it, back and forth in the book, or we can be more consecutive. It's up to you. Louder, please.
Blessed assurance.
Page.
5.
Great. Sounds good. Don't be shy. What page is that? 25. What page? 23. 32. Number 31, the old rugged cross. Number 18, How Great Thou Art. We don't want to leave without singing that. Yeah, we'll sing it all. about number 36? We'll close with This Little Light of Mine. Even though you didn't stand up and clap. It's Great Is Thy Faithfulness, and I'm just going to play a solo piano. If you need to leave, it is 2:30. I won't feel hurt if you're leaving.
Thank you very much.